What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Game Changers podcast. My name is Coach Jay, and this podcast I'm super pumped about. One, because it is a great friend of mine, and two, because literally with this podcast is about mental performance, mindset, all that stuff. And I have somebody on here who is going to give us some amazing tips and insight into the mindset side of athletics. So I want to welcome my friend Melissa.
Hi,
What's up,
Jay.
girl?
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes.
Excited.
I'm so pumped. Well, first of all, can you give us a little background on what you do, who you are?
Yeah, so currently I'm the director of behavioral science and do all the Major League mental performance for the Kansas City Royals. I started, well, my background's in clinical psychology, started more in the clinical realm. So I was doing a lot of trauma, a lot of crisis work, families, child and adolescent. During that time, I was coached. I loved sports, played soccer in college. And so that part's always been in my background. And it wasn't until kind of shifting out of the trauma and crisis that I started working with a lot more student athletes over in Connecticut. And ultimately that transitioned into starting to work in baseball. Then I started with the Dodgers, and now I'm heading into, time flies, year 5 with the Royals, and second year kind of doing this embedded model with a major league team.
Wow, wait, it's been 5 years since the Royals.
I will be yep, going into year 5, and I was with the Dodgers a year and a half for that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I felt
No,
like time has like froze because I think every year I'm like, yeah, it's been like, yeah, she's been with them for a few years and all this. And I'm like, wait, what the heck? It's been 5 years.
I'm trying to think of the last time I saw you in person. I don't remember. I was like just getting into baseball, maybe.
I
Um,
think it was the last time I think was at IU when you gave that presentation to like the strength staff or like to the coaching staff. So I just came up to visit and hung out with you guys all day. I think that was the last time.
I think you're right. That's wild.
Okay, yeah, no, that has to change, which
We
we
got to
know is
change
going to change.
that.
Which I know we're going to change that soon because we're going to catch some games. But I'm like, what the heck? Melissa is amazing, guys, and I'm just so pumped to have her on because I have an actual professional at this. You know what I mean? I give you some tips and tricks that I love that I've learned, but hey, this girl is a professional. So I'm super pumped to have you on. But I actually want to ask you a question. So after all the work that you've done with like athletes and really diving into mental performance, if you were to go back to you as an athlete, what piece of advice would you give yourself?
Oh,
With
I
yeah.
love that. I love that question. I think probably one of the topics that we're going to hit on today. Of course, they always people always give you a hard time, like why did you become a therapist? And usually therapists always have a story behind what led them to go down that path.
Yes.
Um, I would say growing up, I grew up in a pretty critical environment, so I received a lot of criticism and feedback, which I think ultimately turned into a lot of need to be perfect and that perfectionism. And I think at times I had a tough time kind of managing failure. I think oftentimes I cared so much about the little details instead of continuing to focus kind of on just the process of the day to day and what I love about sport. I think there's so much pressure and this concept of kind of where you should be and what you're trying to get to that we miss out, and like why sports are so tremendous or why performing in general, right, makes it so special. And then if you get to be a part of that very small elite population that gets to that next level, right, like it needs to be something that sense of accomplishment, or almost that out of like what made you fall in love with that sport. I think for so many it ends up being this love-hate relationship. And even in baseball, I can't tell you how many times baseball players, because of the sport of being so high in failure, where it becomes the same kind of dynamic. And I know at times I felt that growing up as a child, where I'd be so upset, and then going into adolescence, then college, that it became less about the sport and more about trying to get to an outcome, which I think takes away from the game and your ability to actually just relax and perform.
Yeah, I really like that. Honestly, like it's a mindset shift, I feel like, because like you said, as athletes, we can get so focused on performance, the scoreboard, the stats. I know a lot of things like coaches will do like a negative plus stat sheet for you, and like I need to get there or accomplish that. But it's going back to, why do we love playing? You know what I mean? Because it's like, at the end of the day, like, this is what I tell people. I love sports, and I love that you said that sports are tremendous. Like, it's so fun to play. But if I'm putting all of this time and effort and money to getting better, why am I doing it? You know what I mean? So I think that's like a huge thing that we have to kind of reel ourselves back and be like, why? Is it because, and it could simply be because I just love being part of a team. Like, if you're on a team sport, I love the community aspect. I love being a part of a team, that like camaraderie of like, hey, we won a game, and like how we like fight together. That's cool. Is it because you want to reach the next level? Is because you love performing? Whatever that is, hone in on that. But it's like, seriously, I just encourage athletes who are listening to be like, why do you play? If you play just because, or you hate it, why are you putting all that time into it? Seriously, I just think that's crazy. But I actually, okay, you speaking on like your childhood just a little bit and growing up and like the criticalness, I actually want to dive into this really quick. And being a coach on the other side now, I just really see a lot of parents who are overly tough on their kids. And it's really hard. And as a coach, I've actually had many conversations with parents, and a lot of times they welcome the conversation. They're like, how do I handle this? Or they uh, right up front are like, I know I'm tough on my kid. That's why I hired you, because I can't do it, because we're going to have like this hate relationship if I coach my kid. What would you tell parents who are really just like honestly brutal on their kids, and it doesn't feel very like loving or like a safe space? How would you approach that conversation with parents? And what are just some tangible things that you would give to parents with that conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's something too with just the way society is going and kind of the pressures. And it seems like it's almost heading in a worse direction of not right or wrong, but more women in the workplace, both parents working jobs, single parent households. You've got social media, you've got keeping up with the Joneses, you get COVID, you get all these different things that happen, right? And then kind of what societal norms then become. And so I think parenting, first of all, has got to be the hardest job. And I don't currently don't have kids, but I can tell you I've worked with enough kids and families to understand the dynamics of like, it is by far the hardest job. And I think as a parent, I think one of the things you really have to look at is understanding who you are and where does some of that come from. I think oftentimes it's very easy to put judgment and be very quick on, okay, we have a lot of parents who put a lot of pressure on kids, and this is what's happening here, and this is why this child has this problem or this adolescent is struggling. And I think there's an aspect to it of like, where does that support come in? So as a parent, where can you hold yourself accountable? Where can you take responsibility of kind of understanding where do some of those things come from? Are you overly stressed because you're trying to take care of a household and maintain a job? Are there financial difficulties? Do you have stress in your relationships outside of just your child? Are you overly competitive? Are there goals and dreams that you didn't get to accomplish growing up that you're trying to live through your child? And I think understanding where that's coming from and having a really good awareness as a parent of where those pitfalls are and what you're trying to push, and how much of it is a you issue and how much of it is really your child. Is it you who absolutely loves the sport and wants them to be successful? Like, would your child say the same thing? Are they that passionate about the sport? And so I think one area there is to understand that dynamic, and then where can you set boundaries for yourself as a parent? Because if anything, as kids are growing up in that development process, they need a safe space to be able to work through stuff. And oftentimes, I think what can be really hard is having the patience to allow time for a child or adolescent just to be able to talk. They need a safe space to be able to express those emotions, right? Like, more often than not, unless you're really little, you know if you've had a good performance or not. And so, kids and adolescents are looking to that adult figure and looking to their parents for that safe space and that validation. And that doesn't mean, not having an honest conversation. If play didn't go well, okay, well, what was your, being able to have the conversations around how the child felt about that, where they could have done better, what was the win. And then if you're a parent that's super competitive, I think sometimes maybe you need to have a little bit of quiet. Like, how about we talk about this later in the day? Maybe you have to separate yourself and give yourself some space post performance before you engage with your child if you feel like you cannot have a conversation that isn't positive. So those are a few things I would think, being able to go to there. And then I would say for the adolescent, right, for smaller kids, it's a little difficult, more on the parent. But then as you get middle school, kind of adolescent, it's also the responsibility, I think, at that point to learn some skills around kind of how do you set boundaries with your parents, understanding that what your parents want and what you're doing is not, it's out of their control, right? You're in control of kind of being able to manage that. And that's really hard for a child because your immediate thing is you want approval from people, but it's understanding too, like, where's your threshold for what you can handle and when is something not seem, productive or seem like this is something that might be helpful for you, and where can you separate and maybe take some space, or also tell the parent exactly kind of how you're feeling. I feel really hurt, when you say these things, or I feel like this doesn't help me perform any better when you say those comments. It just sounds more mean.
Yeah.
That's definitely a two-way street, depending upon kind of the age of the child.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. And the biggest thing I'm pulling from that is you talking about a safe space. And I said something in the podcast a little bit ago, talking about like, what is that environment after a game when like you get in the car? You know what I'm saying? Is it like I I've been fortunate enough that my parents were super awesome and like helped me have a safe space like after performances and stuff. But still, like I honestly, being super brutally honest, I feel bad for a lot of the girls that I coach knowing that that car ride home is not a safe space, and I know that they have so much anxiety around that car door closing, but I what I also see what you're talking about is it's a conversation. So it's like, okay, sometimes though they don't feel like either way, it could be parent or child. Because I know some I know some kids are not the easiest to probably parent either. So it's not just it's just not the parents, but that conversation or welcoming, hey, for the kid, I need these boundaries because of XYZ. It's too after a game, you're too competitive and I need you to chill out. Or sometimes the kid just needs to be like, I don't mind the tough criticism, but maybe give me 5 minutes after a game because I'm already too tough on myself. And then one thing I also like that you said is it's the same thing with like missing a layup, right? Like, a kid will miss a layup and a parent will go nuts. Like it's like, do you really think the kid meant to miss the layup type of thing? Or so I like how you said a kid, especially like when they get older, they know if they have a good performance or a bad performance. We don't need to like harp too much on like you suck this game. You're like this is like I know I did. I know. You don't have to tell me. I know, but I think yeah, that safe space is really important. Um and yeah, I'm just trying to think of like what are how would you encourage a kid or an athlete to approach that conversation? Like that, I could tell you that'd be kind of tough. I don't like confrontation, so I know for my parent especially, I'd be like, I don't know how to approach this. How would you like maybe welcome that conversation or some maybe conversation starters for that child?
Yeah, I think several ways to go about it. And I think this is kind of a downfall too. What you don't want to do is take the problem away from the child either. I think oftentimes when things are scary or there's a lot of fear-based situations, we tend to avoid. And I say we, because as
Hmm.
human beings, if we don't like
Yeah,
something or we're feeling anxious, we would like to run the other way. Right. And so I
absolutely.
think being able to provide kids with tools and ways to go about that communication is more important than stepping in and maybe doing it for them. Being able to ask a lot of questions of the child and what feels comfortable for you, what doesn't feel comfortable for you, because you want to encourage those conversations to happen. But you're also teaching valuable lessons for child and adolescent they need going into adulthood, right? Like these are difficult things. If there's something going on conflictually, communication hasn't been great. How do we help improve that communication and help make communication more comfortable for a child or adolescent, right? One of the things I think about there is sometimes for kids, if talking is really difficult, we actually had a very powerful, through our kind of marketing department and mental health awareness month in May, what we did at the Kansas City Royals, they put out what was called Shut Out the Stigma. And there's a really powerful kind of documentary on, it was talking about how kids would write letters to their parents explaining kind of how they felt, or when they play a sport, sometimes not feeling good enough in their eyes, and just real genuine notes that had a lot of meaning, that really pulled a lot of feedback, even from my colleagues and people I worked with, that were like, wow, that's really powerful, and makes me think about things differently as a parent. So writing is always a way to be able to kind of put out sometimes those feelings, if talking about it. I think also making sure you're never having a conversation when everyone's heated or in the busiest moment, being able to pick a time of like, I'd like to talk to you about something, coming out in that way. And I think too, if you have a strong role model, is there a way that maybe you can utilize, the coach or a teacher in some capacity as kind of a mentor to support in the dynamic of maybe having a conversation together? I do know it's not butterflies and roses. Like, there are some situations that it's not just a simple argument. There are some significant events going on, if not at times abuse, right? Or what can come across as being abusive. And so having that support and trust of another adult, maybe to encourage having that conversation with them, is a good opportunity for that as well.
For sure. Yeah, and again, I love the whole journaling aspect. I think those three things that you gave were amazing, but journaling is so powerful. I know it's helped me in my journey with mental health and mental performance. And even just like, I know we talked about the other day, but like even writing a letter, but not giving it to the person, you know what I mean? Or just at least being able to express, or if you feel comfortable, giving it to that person. And I know that that would even help me through breakups. Like I would even do it with breakups and like write the letter to that person or to that emotion or to whatever and just pour it all out. And then if I'm done, I can rip it up or I can light it on fire or put it in the campfire, something like that, and just be almost done with it, at least for that night. You know what I mean? And process it. So I love that. So yeah, the journaling, again, I think it's so wise to not have a conversation when you're super heated, even if it's like you said, step away for 5 minutes. I know we have a rule with coaching, at the programs I'm with, is like we have no conversations with the parents for 24 hours, or just to let the game like be done. If you're pissed off at us, let it just be 24 hours, or at least the next morning. Go home, sit with it. That, and then what was the last one you said? I just went out of my head. It was I forget what you said. Yeah, I don't know. You said like three good
Well,
things, and I
you just got me stuck in how awesome I think it. I mean, you get me on another point of like the structure aspect too, of creating that expectation, right? And that predictability of like, okay, for 24 hours, we don't talk to parents, or there isn't that
Mhm.
coach engagement. But like, I think you just hit the nail on the head with that too, is like, how do you create and establish those expectations that give predictability, right? So like, when this happens, or contingency planning for, this is how we're going to work through this, or we're going to set this boundary, so you already know what that is, and that already creates a level of safety and predictability, right? And so the more that you can do that and create that structure, also the better for being able to set up kind of what those expectations are. That was another, just made me think of that when you brought that up.
Yeah, I think that that's, I know we were talking about parent to player or child or parent to coach, but also I think that that's really important for like teammate to teammate or teammate to coach even, or coach to teammate. Because I know there's times where it's like I am frustrated at this player with even more so how they acted. You know what I'm saying? And there's times where I've blown up and I've been just letting that frustration get the best of me instead of having that conversation afterwards. Or one thing I'm very conscious of or really trying is like, if a player is just seriously frustrating me during practice or a game or whatever, and I get on them really hard, I try to have a conversation with them afterwards. Or if both of us are heated, hey, let's chat about it at practice the next day. And I know there's so many times, especially just again because I'm more coaching, girls, and we just are so emotionally driven that it's like I think sometimes we can really be dramatic on things and be like really frustrated of she said this, she did that. Or one thing I'm always talking to my players about is like, don't let the tone of what they're saying like dictate what they're saying. I know sometimes we can be like, I know I've done it as an athlete where I was just frustrated at myself. And when I was trying to talk to my teammate, it came out very mean or harsh or like with a worse tone than how I meant it. And then I had to go up to the player afterwards, like, hey, look, sorry, I didn't mean it that way. I was frustrated. I was maybe out of breath and it came out like, a wrong way. So just confronting that and having those conversations of like, nope, it's my teammate. She has the best intentions for me. Her tone wasn't the best. If I felt like it was maybe mean, maybe we'll have that conversation. But pretty much what I'm feeling like the topic of what we're talking about is being okay with having the conversation and setting those expectations. I feel like that eliminates a lot of drama, maybe.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point too. And it makes me think about too, especially going into that adolescent preteen year too, is like having that opportunity to maybe have each day or kind of before practice, you have 10 minutes, or even as a coach, being able to set the tone of like anything that needs to come out to clear the air. Accountability, right? And I know you do a tremendous job of this, of like that accountability of like what as human beings, as coaches, as mental performance coaches, like we're gonna screw up. That's a given. How do we model for that, like the accountability and responsibility there? Because that's what creates that next level of trust, right? It's not about the mistakes or the okay, might have come at you, or like players are going to test your buttons. It's just part of it, right? And I think the other aspect that we forget about too is acknowledging kind of like the adolescent brain. We think of development too, and coming into youth. So the amygdala, which is responsible for the emotions, like that aspect develops first. The prefrontal cortex takes longer to develop. So what happens is oftentimes when you think teenagers look crazy, that emotional flooding comes out first. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for decision making, right? So as you get older and your brain develops, you have a better understanding of like, oh, I feel really mad. Okay, but I know how to manage this better so that I can make a better decision at that point. That is something that's missing too when you're younger. So you can just get at it and you get that flooding of emotions that happens too as an adolescent when you see that, right? So when something happens, it's like doomsday. It's just like a flood, and that's a good opportunity too when we think about arousal regulation on okay, what's being able to identify what that emotion is. Do you need to take a step back? Do you need to just kind of get it off your chest? What do you need to do so that you can manage that and then move on? Because it's okay that you're having it. It's what you do with it. Right. And so that's the aspect to an element of that learning process. I think like as a coach and as a player, how do you kind of set that tone? Parent, coach, player to player, right?
Yeah, exactly. And one thing I'm pulling from what you're saying, just like a afterthought, is I I think there needs to be a conversation a little bit more, and I believe it's getting there, on it's not a one size fit all with how you coach a player. And I even had like a thought a while ago about even like I know the books for like more romantic relationships, but like the whole love languages book or like learning love languages, because I've noticed with players their love language is I need to give them a hug. Like I just need to put my arm around them and say it's okay, or a fist bump. Some of them are more they don't even want to hear like me say good job because they're like, no, I didn't do a good job, but they want more whether that's like extra time with them after practice or a game or whatever. So I that's one thing I've been trying to think about a lot more and just try to identify within my players is how do they receive criticism? How do they receive coaching? How do they receive encouragement? And that's something I'm trying to get better at and learn and be more intentional with. But that's I kind of am pulling that from too our conversation. How what do you think if a coach is listening to this? How can you encourage that for them to like maybe pick out those things or identify or maybe be able to put that into this week's practice of intentionally figuring out how to coach each player, which can be tough. I mean, we have what up to 10 to 15 players a lot of times when it comes to basketball. I know other, sports have more rosters, you know what I mean? But yeah, how would you approach that conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely one of those things, it's not going to be a one size fits all and not an overnight answer. I think one of the immediate things a coach can start thinking about is it's about the human being first. If you look at it that way, what's going on for this human being, and then athlete second, right? And so I think oftentimes we can look at certain behaviors, sometimes impulsivity, or it might be defiance, or maybe work ethic, like knowing what your triggers are as a coach, and then identifying, and if you're able to see some of those behaviors and you pick those up in athletes, I think the questions that you need to be asking yourself is like, what is going on for that athlete? What is that athlete's background? What's happening at home? What's happening at school? What is there a gain that the athlete gets by this behavior? Because oftentimes it's like we look at these behaviors sometimes and it's like people genuinely don't wake up wanting to be an asshole. Like that's just not human nature, right? Unless like they're really angry at the world and they're intentful about putting the anger back on someone else. Like these behavior patterns are coming from something. And so I think being able to understand that, and recognizing that it's bigger than just kind of off the court or off the field. So I think one thing as a coach is like starting to observe a little bit more about your players. And I think getting to know like what's family dynamics look like, what are their passions, if you're really good with like sarcasm and humor and jokes, can you utilize that with getting to know players? If you recognize that a player looks off that day, can you have a conversation of a quick check-in? Hey, I noticed seem like a little bit more stressed out, you're quieter today, is everything okay? Building that trusting relationship with the player is not going to happen overnight, right? But if you set those expectations, you have a good policy of kind of what you want communication to look like, you have an open door, and you genuinely show care towards that athlete, that athlete's going to come around, right? And that's recognizing being able to know your triggers, the level of patience that you have, what you're willing to tolerate and what not. So at times it doesn't mean not setting consequences and letting your athletes do whatever they want. But the better you have that structure and those expectations in place, and then be able to check in and show that care in different ways, whatever that art of that is for you, that's going to be different on each coach, the better off you're going to be able to be to get the result that you want for your athlete. I think
Yeah.
sometimes I think sometimes with coaches, like there's such an agenda to get to this level of performance, right? And I see it too. It's like because people are worried about at the pro level, the collegiate level, are so worried about their jobs and doing the right thing and making sure that they're such a good coach that they're missing the whole bigger intent about like why they're doing what they're doing at that point, right? And that genuine aspect of that kind of gets lost. And I think that's the most rewarding part about coaching, is being able to establish that trust and building that relationship with that player. Because oftentimes it's do this, do this, do this, and then the frustration comes, well, they're not doing it the way I want it. How about if we listen to what they need and what they want? If they feel heard, I can guarantee that they're going to come around. You'll get them to do what they want or what you want them to do, right? And I think sometimes as coaches and as adults, we get stuck in this mindset and of agenda of what we need to accomplish. It doesn't have to be done our way all the time, right? If the task gets done or we get the outcome that we're looking for, it just may be in a way that we're not used to, or that may be in a way that we're not comfortable with.
Yeah. Wow. No, that's so powerful. And I think you hit the nail on the head with the whole like remembering that this is a human and this is a young person too. You know what I mean? Like we're like, especially for me, like I'm dealing with young women who are going through one of the hardest times of their life where they're developing identity and figuring this thing out. I know we're always figuring life out, but like they're going through middle school and high school. Like, I'm sorry, I would not want to be a high schooler today. Absolutely not. And the things that they're going through and confronting and dealing with, and it's really tough. And I just think I've always had this thought where I feel like we treat normal life and then sports life as two completely different things. And it's like you have to perform here, but it's like, okay, but I also have to perform in the classroom. I have to perform as a good friend. I have to perform as a good daughter. I have to perform as a good athlete. And I think we just separate those things. And it's like, no, you're human first. And when I love what you said, like, again, we just talked about player to or parent. relationship and that safe space, but also that court should feel like a safe space to these athletes as well. And as the coach, as the leader of, that team, I just believe as a coaching profession, we're called to serve because that's what we do. We serve, we help these athletes, we help serve them and equip them so that we can get the win or get the championship or learn valuable skills. But like you said, I love how you said we can get lost in this agenda of winning, you know what I mean? Because it too, especially the level you're at as a coach or just a staff or even players, you get paid to win. That is your job. If you don't win, you get fired. So it's like this balance where it is tough, but at least for high school, because that's like a main portion of my audience is middle school and high school, like you're not getting paid to play. You know what I'm saying? Like, so right now it's about going back, enjoying the process, loving it. How can I find enjoyment in this game? And I think that's like so valuable, what you said.
It
So
just
valuable.
it just reminds me too of like being an athlete. And I remember being in high school and like vivid memories of like being excited to go to soccer practice because my crush was practicing on the other field and I was just so excited and wanted to like show off. Like, let's be serious, right? Like there were days where my head wasn't like, oh, we gotta win a game today. Like I'm 14
Mhm.
years old and there's this cute soccer player over there. I want to go like I want him to see me and know that like I'm
Literally.
good, right? Like so I think our levels of
That's so
motiv-
real for a second. That
that's what
is
I'm
so real.
saying. I think
For
about this like so serious all the time. And I think back to like some of my memories of sport. And don't get me wrong, I loved like competing and winning and like, but there were days where it's just like, yeah, I'm just gonna look at my crush all day and like talk to my
yes.
girlfriends about whatever drama happened at school. Like
Mhm.
that's
Literally.
right. And
I
that's
love that.
part of what we loved about sport though. I miss those
Mhm.
even in college, like the time we
Yeah.
spent together off the field as well. Like that was
Yeah.
a big part of it, you
I
know?
know. I do miss that. That is something that I'm like, dang, man, like just because even like in college, a lot of my teammates, we lived in the same apartment complex and just being able to like go up to their apartment and sit and chat and like all those times. And also too, I think as yeah, I like there's a stereotypical saying of like you leave everything like if it's or like in practice, leave the outside world and the outside world. I need you to focus here. And is there a little bit of truth to that? Absolutely. In the sense of we gotta focus up, we gotta focus on this play, we gotta do this. But also too, we're human. Like with and there's real life things like that are bigger than learning this play. Like there's things that these kids go through that are way bigger than putting a ball through a hoop or, kicking a ball in a goal or like hitting, a home run. Like all those things, there's bigger issues in life than that, especially as like a young adult. So I just think like going back to again your point, I feel like we just keep full circling things. It's like when you go back to this is a person, this is a young woman, a young man who is growing and learning, and their brain is literally developing and trying to figure out where their identity lies, how they're like what they want to do, how they want to live their life, dealing with friend drama, relationship drama, drama at home. It we can't always leave things at the door when we come into practice. And I just think that that's a conversation that needs to happen a little bit more again with coaches. And I don't know, one of my college coaches would be like, if you it's kind of funny because it's like those non-mandatory mandatory practices, like one of those things, but it's like he put like a red tape on the floor, like in front of the door. He was like, the minute you pass this red line, like you're all focused here, like this is the only thing we're worried about. But if you're not ready, like, don't go past this red line. And I'm like, dude, I have to go past this red line whether I want to or not, man. Like, I don't know. So
Yeah,
it's
I'm
stuff
trying
like
to play
that.
the game tomorrow. Yeah, yeah,
So I'm like, I got to, my guy. Like, I don't know. Like, I can't just sit in the locker room because I won't play. So, but you're
right.
also not a safe space for me to talk to. So I'm kind of stuck here. So, like, yeah, I'm probably going to have a crappy practice because I was dealing with this or that or like mental health things. But I got to pass this red line because if I don't pass this red line, now we're going to have a tough conversation. And I don't want to have that tough conversation because I don't feel like it's a safe space. You know what I mean? So I just think like I love the way that like more mental health and mental performance is going, but it still has its ways, you know what I mean? So can you actually chat about that real quick? Because you brought this up in our phone call, and I kind of like didn't separate the two, and I was like, wait, that's good. How you were talking about we sometimes put more of an emphasis on mental health versus mental performance. And can you like chat about that a little bit in the more so the sports world and how we can approach that conversation?
Yeah, and I think both have its place. I think what's been happening, especially post-COVID, and they're doing a lot of research now, and it's going to take some years where we'll see kind of the aftermath of what COVID, and not just COVID, but you think about social media and just the upcoming generation of how what kids are exposed to nowadays and expectations and societal norms, right? So as society changes, human behavior is going to change, right? And so I think some of with that is that as a result of that, mental health, I think, has gone through the roof a little bit. Not that mental health hasn't always been there and that we haven't seen anxiety and depression and trauma. I think twofold. I think we probably didn't have accurate understanding of mental health previously because it wasn't comfortable to talk about and people didn't talk about it and they just managed it, right? Whether it was good or bad, they just figured out how to manage it. Where now I think society is a little bit more open about like this exists and like we need to get really comfortable and understand that just like physical health, you have a day where you're sick and you don't feel good. Well, mental health can be the same way. You're going to have days where you may not feel good, or you really genuinely might be down in the dumps, or you might feel anxious, and understanding that. And I think where society is pushing right now is as we're recognizing that the need for mental health and access to mental health care is kind of going through the roof right now. I think a big part of that, and what we know about, I mean, speaking from baseball, and what we know about baseball is that we went from about 11% of all baseball players having a mental health challenge at some capacity at some point in their career to about 20 to 25%. So we went from 2019 to 2022 with that much of a jump, right? And so baseball being a sport that pretty much had the smallest amount of mental health cases out of all sports. And so what we know about that is that's shifted where anxiety is number one, depression is number two, and substance abuse is number three. And so at any point in time, how we've kind of looked at it as there's this emphasis, and I think our, the MLB, NBA, NFL, MLS, NHL are moving in this direction of kind of pushing the need for having mental health care. But at any point in time, it's never just mental performance and just mental health. It's on a spectrum. And I think that's what you and I had talked about a little bit. Oftentimes, like when someone has high anxiety and high pressure situations, and maybe it's situation based versus like someone who might have trait based anxiety and they're just overall a little bit more of a worry wart, like that's just part of their brain and how they were developed, right? Like oftentimes if there's a lot of pressure in a situation or there's a lot of anxiety there's probably a lot of anxiety in other aspects of their life, and understanding where does that come from. Is that biological? Is that environmental? And having that understanding of all those components, and then where is that happening out on the field from a mental performance standpoint. And I think the mental performance is such an important role because that gets into what are the skills and things that are needed to work those emotions, like in a training environment. How do we set up a training environment to be more game like, so we help an athlete learn how to habituate to that stress, right? How do we help that athlete create a routine for them to help them build some confidence, that they have some structure so they know exactly what they need to do, so it takes out some of the guessing game out of it, right? And so I think a big part of that is like what starts as sometimes a mental performance issue, or maybe like, hey, we didn't have a good game on the court, or we usually average 20 points a game and we had 8 that game. Okay, what was happening? And then that spirals into the next game, and then all of a sudden performance is going down, and then that turns into anxiety about not performing well. And then at some point now you can have a mental health issue because that spirals, right? Or perfectionism that kind of gets out of hand and then becomes more clinical because it's having an impact on that athlete's ability to sleep, eat, and function in other environments. And so I think oftentimes that's where a lot of that gets confused. And in psychology, I'll tell you, I might have brought this up too, is like, I think it's misrepresented a lot, and you don't understand, like, human behavior can be so complex, and we pick up these patterns over time because we're trying to figure out what works for us in survival, right? And so oftentimes it's these quick, like, just embrace the suck, or like failure is growth. And it's like, well, great. However, if it was that easy, right? Like, wouldn't have these issues. And so I think people get stuck and kind of like, oh, this quick, if I do this quick mental skill or these 2 minutes, and it's like, ooh, but what's underneath that? Like, before
Mm,
you even get to that skill. And so I think it's just really important to understand, it's on a continuum. It's not necessarily two different separate entities. One, you're just more performance focused, and at any point in time, like, then mental health, I really look at it as you're dealing with the whole human being, where they've come from, where they are, where they're trying to go, what makes them, what are their strengths, where are the areas of growth, what are the things that are getting in the way. And then mental performance is all of that based on the field, and then whatever
yeah.
skills and tools are necessary to help them get through that.
Yeah, I think if any coach is or parent even is watching this, I think you just need to take the encouragement from this conversation and be like, it is not one size fit all. Like that's just the common theme that we're chatting about. And it's like it used to be that way. I felt, and I think it still is at some points. We're getting better, but it's like again, it's not one size fits all with an athlete and even a coach. Like we're people at the end of the day. We all have our things that we have to like, like the onion, like we have the layers that we got to peel back, like all that good stuff. But it's like, yeah, like you said, why am I having this, anxious thought or this anxiety going into my performance or my game? And it's not simply just because you're nervous about the game. There's a lot of other issues or things that you got to unpack. Or hey, I had, like you said, I normally used to a 20-point game. I had an 8-point game, and then this game wasn't the best. I had these turnovers and confronting that. So I just love that this conversation is just being opened up and being chatted about. And it's actually like encouraging me too to be like, how can I better equip my athletes or serve my athletes? Because how can I be a little bit more knowledgeable in this um conversation of mental health, mental performance. And I'm very thankful for you because you are just so knowledgeable and wise in this. And I'm learning as much as I'm asking the questions. I'm sitting here and I'm learning, and I'm going to listen to this podcast back too to be like, how can I learn all these things? So I'm just thankful that we're having this conversation.
Well, and I'm thankful for you because you are a tremendous, as for the years that I've gotten to know you, your heart is unbelievable and your care factor is through the roof. So I know you're changing
Oh,
lives.
thank you.
So
Oh,
feeling
thank you. Oh, thank you. That was so sweet. And too, I kind of want to shift the conversation a little bit because one of the biggest topics I talk about is fear of failure and embracing that failure. And I have this saying, I think I told you, where it's like embrace the messy, because when we're learning a new skill, or maybe we're like learning how to play a game, or we're learning these things, it's gonna be messy, it's gonna be awkward. I'm telling you that right now. I'm not going to tell you that learning the skill is going to be the most fun thing, but also to the biggest emphasis I have on my training is I want it to be a safe space to fail. Like knowing that you can fail. And I'll tell my athletes over and over and over, like in a 15-minute ball handling workout, you're not losing the ball enough. I want you to fail. I'll literally say those words. I want you to fail, because I want you to know that like you're not going to learn a skill going soft or being timid. I always say like soft in the dribble, not soft in like your actions or your soft in your dribble or your attack move, or you're being timid. You're not going to learn it, because I tell them a lot of times, and this is, please correct me if any of this is, wrong, but it's like if I am in a game, or not in a game, in a training session, and I'm going like I'm too scared to make that mistake, or I'm having that fear of failure. When I enter that game and I'm in game mode or game speed, and my instinct kicks in because a player attacks me and I got to make a quick move, your brain only knows the softness of your dribble. So I'm trying to get the point across of how you, like, again, how you practice is how you play, but it's from a reaction standpoint and from a instinctual standpoint of if you've only gone this hard or gone this speed, that's all your brain knows. So I'm trying to tell them like, hey, you got to practice hard not only because I want you to like break a sweat. I want you to do it because in a game, that's how you're going to react. So, long story short, how would you approach or what tips would you give athletes, whether that's like the flow statements or the inner dialogue or just tips on how to approach failure and have a conversation with it, but not let it dictate their whole workout.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point that I'm going to start with. And we talked about that because I absolutely love, like, hey, for the next 15 minutes, this is going to be really messy. Like, this is not going to look pretty. And I know that. And that's part of developing as an athlete, right? It's not any different in the pro level. When you think of like, and the conversations happen a lot with kind of like our hitters, and like as you progress throughout the season, often they get better, right? Because they now have the mental image of what they're seeing from pitching. So the pitching, there's such an extreme in the difference in pitching. I mean, it's unbelievable. I don't, the level of skill of like watching these guys, sometimes I'm just like, I have no idea how you do that. That is insane. Right. But what happens is like their brain's able to pick up on that mental image of the different arm slots and spin and movement of the ball. And because they're at it every single day, right? Okay, now they start picking up on those mental images and their brain has that in there. So it's now going into their working memory, right? So they don't have to think about that. They're just thinking about when they're swinging or not swinging. And so that brings up a really good point too, because I think that's part of what this is both the responsibility of a coach and an athlete, but I think the education, understanding that athletes need time within their training to be pushed past the threshold of comfort. It can't just be feel good BP. It can't just be feel good bullpens, because what happens in a high stress situation is you're going to go back to what you're comfortable from a movement pattern standpoint, right? And so we have to get really comfortable being able to habituate to that stress. And you don't get that unless you put yourself in those situations of high stress. And so I encourage oftentimes like coaches and athletes to make sure you have designated days throughout the week that you're pushing that threshold that you should be failing. You should be taking 10 minutes where it's like, man, I only hit this many balls, or like did not hit the strike zone. Like, okay, right, you're learning something new and you're pushing past that, right? And then that gets reinforced by the regular routines, and so they're going to keep performing and playing, but then you're also building this other element to it that's getting them ready for the next piece. So that's part of it, right? Is getting comfortable with the failure aspect. But if we're constantly avoiding and we don't allow ourselves to fail because we want to stay in what's comfortable, that's where we get ourselves into trouble, right? And then we get really uncomfortable because at that point, you're not building skills past that. You're not comfortable handling the stress. And oftentimes you'll end up failing anyway, right? Because you're not getting yourself better. And guess what? You're going to go up to other performance and you're going to get beat. So that, all of those different aspects of understanding where some of that comes from. I think an understanding too, and a helpful tool for athletes to really start is kind of going back to a little bit of the journaling. I think it's having that awareness that because we go and have about 60,000 thoughts that pop up in our brain, is understanding what's causing what. And so being able to identify what thoughts we're having, what feelings are associated with those thoughts, and then how are we behaving as a result of it. Right. So if we're going in with that, like, I can't make a mistake, I'm going to get kicked off the team, I'm going to sit the bench, I'm not going to play. And that's consciously what we're thinking about all the time. Well, yeah, you're going to feel anxious. You're probably going to want to avoid. You're going to be scared to just kind of let loose and learn the skill. And then oftentimes, right, we're looking for a behavior to calm that anxiety or whatever that feeling is. So whether it's avoidance, whether it's reassurance seeking behaviors is a big one. So feeling like you have to do things or you're seeking validation constantly. Is this okay? Did I do that right? I got to do this 10 times in order for me to get that outcome, right? Like I got to be in the training room and do this every single day if I want to get that outcome. And it's less about what you're doing, but it's more about if I do this task, then I'll have this happen. And then all that's doing is easing anxiety. That's not actually helping you with a skill or recovery. So I think that's probably for an athlete, a great place to start is, can you start labeling those thoughts? Is this a fact or is this a belief? Right? Because
Yep.
more often than not, most of everything of what you're thinking about is a belief, right? Like, oh, I made a mistake today. Okay, well, yeah, that's a fact. You're going to make mistakes. What feeling did that give you and how did you respond? Because you're looking for that behavior change. It's okay to have a negative thought. You're going to have them. It's okay to have some doubt. You're going to have it, especially learning a new skill. But what's the behavior and the follow up? Do you get right after it and say, screw it? Like, I know this probably isn't going to be pretty, but I'm athletic enough and I'm good enough at this that I know I'm going to figure it out. So I'm going to keep going
Yeah.
after it.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's an area that's a really good place to start.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. So going back to you were saying like scheduling in within like that week of training actual 10 minutes of like you're gonna fail and like really putting them in that position to fail. But say I have an athlete that is just really, really struggling with that fear of failure. Like it's really hard for them. How would you write the rest of that workout almost? So would you say like, okay, here's that 10-15 minutes of this is hard, you're gonna fail, you're probably not gonna feel the best afterwards. And then would you combat that with things that's maybe an like a normal routine of like maybe the workout or things that you know that hey, we just gotta tweak a little bit to kind of make them feel a little bit more encouraged or um, more positive about the workout? Like, how would you balance that workout or tell your coaches to balance it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think too, like to your point, obviously speaking kind of from an elite athlete and older athlete too, but some of your younger ones are more introverted or shy or highly anxious. A big part is you always want to make sure that you're staying consistent in expectations, providing as much structure and predictability as possible, right? And what you don't want to do with that child, you want to create a safe space for that athlete all the time, right? And building that trust, constant encouragement, right? And then like when that athlete
Mhm.
has some success, really reinforcing that success. And one of the things that you and I talked about with an athlete, like the reassurance, I need validation all the time, or like the negative seeking attention, like, oh, that wasn't good. That wasn't good. It's like, are there things that we can not draw attention to? So if you're noticing
Mhm.
athletes really, really negative, right, and they're trying to avoid stuff all the time, we don't want to give a lot of reinforcement to that negative behavior because they're getting attention for that.
Yeah.
So they're learning, oh, if I continue to, oh, that wasn't good, right? They're learning, oh, if I do that, my coach is going to say something and give me feedback, right? That's not the kind of attention we want to give, right? So looking for opportunities, like we want that athlete to be successful. So you may have an athlete where you might need to back off a little bit initially and make sure that they're building confidence and having success and skills. What we don't want to do is put an athlete who's like, take soccer, for example, and they're struggling with some like foundational dribbling exercises, and then we're trying to get them to the next level by doing some cuts and some moves, but dribbling's difficult. Well, yeah, now you're never going to set them up for success. That's where I
Mhm.
think going back and knowing that athlete, it might be a little bit of a slower pace for certain athletes. You might think about who you're pairing that athlete up with, right? Might
Mhm.
think about one of the things that I remember that my coach did an awesome job with me, because I was very much a people pleaser and a little bit timid, was in college. We did one-on-one, what we had one-on-one drills where we went at it. And then I got put on my butt left and right by one of our best defenders at the time as a freshman. And like, but I knew what to expect. And I knew I was going to have to work through that discomfort. And I knew that that was going to make me better, right? And so I accepted the challenge, but because the predictability was there, because that foundation was there, and I was also given the confidence and the reinforcement, like, you're really good. I wouldn't put you in this situation if I didn't think you could handle this,
Yeah.
right? And so that's
Yeah.
where I think it goes back to the things that we talked about, is knowing like your individual athletes,
Yeah.
and there, you might have to back off a little bit. But however, what I would never encourage is even a child who's highly anxious. What I might often do is say, it seems like you're having a really tough time right now. Why don't you go take a step off the field, take a couple minutes, see if you can calm down, and then see if we can get you back out there. Because oftentimes what you don't want to do is continue to reinforce that. And like if they get scared, it's an immediate phone call to a parent, or it's oh, you can't handle that drill, go sit down. And it's like, well, hold on, right? We got to help them and understand what they're working through, because the better off they're able to manage that uncomfortable feeling and then get through that, the better off they're going to be moving forward to continue to habituate
Yeah.
to that stress.
Yeah. No, that's also good. I love that too, because one thing I've noticed with some of my athletes is like I'll put them in that tough position, or like, hey, we're working at a drill that's we're like almost there. We're almost there. It's just not working for us right now. I'll do that. I'll say like, hey, go get water. And it's not because like you're really sweating that much, because say we're like, we're working on like a skill and it's not very high pace, but just to reset. Like just get off, reset, let your brain just like just chill for a second and then come back. And honestly, I would say like 9 times out of 10, they nail the drill when they come back within a very short amount of time. And that's something that I've just observed with my athletes. Like I've noticed, like I'll put them in that position. But yeah, I agree. Like it's one of those things where I almost it's almost like funny where I try to be a little bit annoying with what I say and repetitive of like make the mistake. Like I'll say it over and over and over, like make it, or I'll even purposely get more excited for them when they make the mistake at times when we're learning versus you got it. I'll reinforce it. Like if they did, yes, that's it. But like when they make a mistake, I'm like, that's what I want, because I want them to know like I want you to make the mistake. I'm not just saying it and then you make the mistake and then I'll bite your head off because I'm so mad at you. You know what I mean? And I try to set that expectation of I'm gonna be mad at you on the controllables. Are you hustling? Are you giving up? Are you this? Like those kind of things. Then I'm gonna be pissed off at you and you're gonna feel it. Those kinds of things. But always I'm like, I saw what you tried to do. And honestly, I give a lot of this to my dad with how he coached and stuff, and how we we would make the mistake, or say it was like a backdoor cut or like a post entry and we just got it tipped, or like it was the ball was a little too far in front of us on a cut. But it's like I saw what you were trying to do. You know what I'm saying? And I think that that's really powerful. And I know from experience that helped me of like, oh, I'm pissed that I made that mistake. But hearing a coach be like, but it was the right idea. Like, oh, okay, cool. Instead of like being so timid to maybe make the pass, or go in for a layup, because I know if I get a turnover, I miss, I'm just going to get chewed out. And I think there's a big difference there. And I try my best. I know I'm still a young coach, but it's like those things that I try to take into account of how can I equip my players to be okay with making this mistake or being okay with failure, because you tried. It's one thing to try and it's one thing to not try. I actually get more mad at my players when they like completely make a good move and then they just stop. And then they're like looking at me like, what are you looking at me for?
Keep playing. Yeah.
Keep playing. I'm like, stop looking at me, go.
Oh gosh, yeah, they want that validation. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just tough, but I'm like, yeah, but everything that you've been saying is just so incredible. And I actually encourage all the parents, coaches, athletes, whoever's watching this, to just actually watch this podcast back multiple times and just pull things from it, because there's so much, whether from just the simple conversation of setting a boundary to writing a letter to maybe yourself or to a parent or to a coach or to an athlete that's frustrating you, or confronting that fear of failure and being okay with it. I just, man, you just gave so much advice and wisdom in this podcast, and I'm just like so thankful that you took this hour out of your day to come talk to me, because I learned so much too. And I'm going to be
Oh,
hitting you
good.
up a lot.
Good. Yes, please do. This was fantastic. It's great to talk about these things, and definitely an area I'm passionate about, and it keeps me connected with the youth population and stuff too. Because I do miss that. I do miss the young ones.
For sure. For sure. Before we head off, is there any last little things that you would like to say about what we talked about, or just any other golden nuggets that's on your heart?
No, I think the overall thing is, I think we have to learn to, one, give each other a little bit of grace. I think we're in a society that puts a lot of pressure on just how we should be as parents and how we should be as coaches and how
Yeah.
we should be as a 10-year-old and what we should look like at 16. And I think that
Yeah.
just because of technology and all these platforms, and oftentimes you get wrapped up in how things should be and wrapped up in what the outcome should be. And there is no perfect way. Like, there's no perfect way to do it. You're doing the best that you can every single day, and the decisions that you make for that day is what makes sense for you in that moment, right? And
Yeah.
so I think just remembering that, and not every day is going to be great. I often think of like these positive quotes that are all over the place of like whatever brings you happiness, but I also think accepting that part of what gives you a sense of fulfillment is the
Mhm.
challenges, stuff that you've gone through, right? It makes that
Yeah.
accomplishments and the end result that much better because of the journey that you were on, and it's never going to be linear. And just
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah. I love that. Give yourself grace. Athletes, my athletes, I'm gonna send that to them because I tell them this all the time. So somebody else said it. Somebody else did, not just me. So give yourself grace. We're not perfect. We're not gonna be perfect athletes because we're not perfect humans. And accepting that growth is honestly such a cool thing. And you do not grow without failing a few times. You know what I mean? So I just think if we can have those mindset shifts of when I fail, that's actually such a good thing because now I'm learning and I just figured out how not to do that. So I'm one step closer. So just I want all of you to sit with those 3 things and journal about it, sit with it, have a conversation with it. I think it's super powerful. But, Melissa, thank you so much for your time and just chatting with me and, just giving all the golden nuggets that you have, and I'm just so appreciative of you and our friendship and just all the knowledge that you bring. So, thank you for that.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's always great getting to catch up with you.
Yes, of course. Well, everyone, that being said, make sure to like and subscribe to this podcast if you're on the YouTube version. If you're on the regular podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, make sure to rate and leave a comment because I want this podcast to reach more people and I need the support. So please go ahead and go for that. That'd be amazing. But we'll see you guys next week for another podcast.